So, Donbrothers episode 45. This episode was quite the interesting one. And when I saw King-Ohja trending on Twitter this morning, I was thinking, oh, that's just the Twitter algorithm sort of making King-Ohja trend because of toys on sale and stuff like that. But no, that wasn't the case. We actually got to see the King-Ohja mecha show up in this episode of Donbrothers. It just shows up, does its thing, and leave. And I gotta say, seeing the King-Ohja mech or Zord, whatever you want to call it, show up in this episode of Donbrothers was pretty freaking cool. It's a really cool design, and actually seeing it in action after we saw some images of it floating around online with the toy box now being released, I'm glad I actually threw money at this mech because it looks pretty freaking cool. And I wonder when King-Ohja starts airing later on in the year, we'll get an explanation why that mech showed up, because it just appears out of nowhere, then it leaves. But let's talk about the overall episode, because the overall episode, episode 45 of Donbrothers, is quite the interesting episode. Now, I'm not using the overtime fan subs like I usually do for my reviews. I'm using a different fan sub group. I wasn't expecting it to be subbed so early, so if I make a mistake or if I miss anything or I get the wrong idea of what's going on, I do apologize, but feel free to correct me in the comment section down below. So, without any further ado, let's talk about Donbrothers episode 45. So, Donbrothers episode 45 is called Laughing Village, Rugged Village, which also translates to Kagamora Gagamora, which is the name of Jirou's hometown, and Gagamora translates to the home of what Future Hurricane's manga is based on, which has some interesting hindsight and bits of information of how the final battle of Donbrothers might turn out. So, this episode was not what I was expecting it to be, but like all Donbrothers previews, they tease you, they fake you out and stuff like that. But this episode sort of saw our heroes visiting Jirou's village, and we kind of get some information about what the Juto is, the explanation of why Jirou is the penguin Juto. But not only that, you also find out that Jirou's caretaker is a Juto as well, and the original body has been there for, I think it said 100 years in the fan subs, because he said like that original body doesn't have much time left, so I want to make Jirou my successor. And a fascinating thing to see with Jirou's hometown, I think that village is completely deserted, because whenever we see Jirou talking to his friends, we only see it through Jirou's perspective. But when we have a scene where Momotaro and Inuzuka rush in there, they're not there. So I'm wondering if the entire village is in Jirou's head the entire time, which is something that was teased last week when Jirou showed Kijino an image of Rumi on his phone, and we didn't see anyone there. So it's quite the fascinating head case with what's going on with Jirou right now, with him planning to be the successor. And not only that, we saw the brand new Noto show up in this episode. We meet two of them. One of them's like a girl, and one of them's like the buff dude. They're sort of counterparts to Sonoza and Sononi. And I gotta say, I really enjoy their personalities from what we see so far. Like I mentioned earlier, yeah, they are sort of vastly different from their counterparts, especially Sonogo and Sonoroku, where they're more aggressive with their behavior, especially with how they sort of handle things, because you've got sort of some guy flirting with Sononi, and then he starts flirting with Sonogo, and she just smashes his face in the plate of spaghetti and says, "Eat your words." And then you've got Sonoroku, who sort of catches Sonoza reading manga and kicks it out of his hand and says, "Are you reading trash again?" So these characters are quite the interesting one, and I think there's another one coming. I'm not entirely sure. I think I could be wrong. But this episode also saw the return of Sononoshi, who has not been seen for like 9 episodes, but they're back again, which it looks like they're going to be back next week as well with his new posse, so I can't wait to see that. Now, in this episode, we also have our Naruto that we've been following since the show began. It looks like they're ready to turn babyface, which is something they've kind of already done, but it looks like they're going to turn to the good side leading up to the end game of this arc. They're going to be good guys, but we'll see what happens. But you have this scene where they're on the elevator. You have the Evangelion elevator scene where they're just talking, and Sonoi is like saying, hey, we got to stay true to our mission. We can't sort of get along with humans. But then you've got Sonoza, who wants to see Haruka be a successful manga artist, and you've got Sanoni, who wants to fight side by side with Inuzuka, and we sort of get this cool scene where we see them do a big pose together, and they walk away from an explosion, and it was a really nice scene. So it's kind of hinting at what we might see later down the line with these characters, but seeing how we've got Sonoshi with his gang showing up, it looks like they're going to be the villains, and the Noto we've been following for a while are going to turn good. But we'll see what happens, We also have Kiji Brother turning into a monster of the week for the third time in the series. He turns into the Gal Ranger monster, and because of all the crazy stuff going on in this episode, such as Momotaro getting sucked into the Juto world because he eats the penguin origami and says, I'll take responsibility for this, and he gets sucked into the portal, and he goes into the forest, and because Kijino turned into a monster of the week, they can't summon their Zords, so that leads to the King-Ohja mech showing up, like I mentioned at the start of the review, which is a pretty sick mech. But one thing that got a laugh out of me that I really freaking enjoyed, and it sucks that this show is almost finished, because I really enjoyed these guys' chemistry on screen together, and that was seeing Inuzuka and Momotaro sort of play off each other as they visited Jirou's house. So there's this one scene where they find a fridge and they think it's like the doorway into Narnia or the Juto world, so they start taking out all the stuff, and Momotaro just shoves Inuzuka's head in there, transports him in there. He's like, hey, transform, because you'll be smaller, you can go in there. And Inuzuka's like, don't order me around. And then Momotaro has to sort of play his words around, saying, hey, why don't you try doing this? And then Inuzuka budges, and then he just shoves him in the fridge again while transformed, like crushing his fingers on the fridge, which has gotta hurt, I will say that. But I really like their chemistry, and it sucks that the show's almost over and we're not going to see more of that, because I think they played off each other really well in a comedic sense, with Inuzuka sort of not like being bossed around and Momotaro sort of telling Inuzuka what to do. I think they played off each other really well in this episode. Now, there's another interesting scene I want to bring up in this episode, and it's at the start of the episode. It's when you have this scene of Juto Natsumi, whatever we're calling her. But she's basically fighting off a bunch of cat Juto, and then Momotaro comes to her rescue. They kind of run off like a bunch of alley cats, which is a really interesting note because they make the sounds. But they run off, and Momotaro says, hey, I don't like what you're doing, because you're basically messing with two people's hearts, because they both love the same person that you're pretending to be. And she doesn't really care. But she's probably gonna die next week, looking at the trailer. Yeah, we've got that scene where she sort of plays his philosophy with Momotaro and speaks in riddles. I'm probably missing something deeper into what she's saying, but yeah, we've got that scene. But overall, Donbrothers episode 45, I really enjoyed it. This was a really great episode, and I can't wait to see where the show is going to go next, because we've got a couple of episodes to go. It's wrapping up at the end of February, which is crazy to think that I've been covering Donbrothers for almost an entire season, but we'll see where it goes. But what did you guys think of this episode? Love it, hate it? Tell me in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, and with that said, I'm going to bring this review / recap / discussion to a close. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.